I feel like I've been traumatized in my marriage. What now?
Welcome to the Therapy Brothers podcast.
I'm Brannon.
I'm Tyler.
We're brothers.
We're therapists.
And we know recovery.
Bring your stories, your questions, your successes with real recovery.
Hey, Tyler, you ready to have some hard conversations?
Let's do it.
Let the Therapy Brothers podcast begin.
Brannon, how's it going, man?
Just living the dream, you know, doing my thing and living the dream. Like that's what's going on with me.
Whatever that means. That means literally nothing.
Doing my thing, living the dream. Every day is beautiful.
That's
every day is wonderful.
Huh? Well, see you later.
Hey, don't say big gulps. That triggers me. Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, this is the best time of year. As we're recording this, we're like 1 week out from the men's retreat. So by the time this comes out, we will have done the men's retreat, but it's kind of like I get the buildup of the excitement for that. And then it's also a couple of weeks away from all of the hunts that come up. So bird hunting started just barely. We got the elk hunt coming in 2 weeks. Then we got the deer hunt right after that. And it's a good time of year.
I just hope you can settle down, like get some sleep before the men's retreat. Don't chase the elk down the mountain. Like you're not going to catch them. I promise you won't.
Yeah.
Just take a chill pill and enjoy this stuff.
I do enjoy it. I'm learning every single year and getting better at it. And I'm realizing that hunting in particular is sometimes, not always, but sometimes an occasion where slower and less actually becomes more.
It's perfect.
Yep.
You just got to sit.
Yep. You got to go nice and slow, pay attention, and really become aware. Mindfulness becomes really big.
Yep.
So anyway, we're not talking about hunting today.
Yeah, no, we actually have some really interesting questions. I think they actually kind of are similar to each other.
A couple similar questions came in back to back from each other. They were actually submitted through therapybros.com, and they didn't want to be guests on the show, but they submitted the questions in writing. So we're going to do a couple of those today.
Yep. So, are you ready for the first one?
Let's do it.
Okay. Says, my wife has experienced a lot of trauma, both as a child and a young adult. She also has a deep mother wound, which has caused her a lot of shame and rejection, which all shows up in how she interacts and perceives me. It's like she's punishing me for what others have done to her by doing the exact same things to me. She literally projects the things she's doing to me onto me as if I'm doing it to her. If she yells at me, she'll accuse me of yelling at her. She's had multiple affairs on me, and yet she's constantly suspicious of me having an affair on her. Can you explain this behavior?
This is a tough situation.
Yeah.
But it's actually versions of this are actually really quite common in marriages. Even without like betrayal trauma or recovery work, this is actually a very common theme in a lot of marriages.
Yeah, very common. You come in, you get married, and you think, oh, two people getting married in love. Well, guess what you're bringing into that marriage? All your stuff. And that person, if you've been raised in an unsafe environment, that person that you're married to then becomes the primary figure in your life for attachment. And so you start to react and respond the way that you've been taught to learn how to survive in relationships, and can create all kinds of war and chaos and abuse and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because we tend to match ourselves up with people that confirm what we've already learned about ourselves and our lives and the world around us. So and this is something that, if you're interested in this topic, this is specific to childhood sexual abuse, but there's a book called, by Dan Allender called Healing the Wounded Heart. And it talks about the recovery process. There's also a partner's book for a partner who's also trying to help their partner heal from their past traumas. And I think it's really good because it helps kind of paint some of the picture of what we're going to talk about here. But basically inside of that book, it brings up this idea that when we have significant traumas from our past, the reason why it becomes trauma is because whatever happens to us actually changes us fundamentally. It changes us in the way that we cope. It changes us in the way that we see the world. It changes us in the core beliefs that we have. It changes us in the behaviors that we do in order to try to figure out how to survive and make order of what's happening to us. And those changes, the beliefs that we form as a result of those traumas, we subconsciously then actually, and this is a way of trying to survive, we actually reenact the same kinds of traumas that we experienced without knowing that we're the ones that are helping to reenact them. So yeah, go ahead, Brannon.
Well, I was going to ask you, so then how do you not do that? How do you shift that pattern and not do that, not create that?
I think the challenge is just right from the very beginning is that when I'm the one who's experienced the trauma, and then let's just say I somehow figure out how to, like I have this history of getting into relationships where the partner that I'm with is abusive to me verbally, right? Mm-hmm. Eventually I get into my third, fourth, fifth, sixth relationship and I start to see this pattern and I go like, why am I such a magnet for being abused? Mm-hmm. Right? Now, I'm not saying this as a blame to the victim. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the beginning part of that is actually asking that question and not asking it in the terms of like, I've got to stay the victim, but truly asking the question, like, what is it that keeps me going back to these relationships and staying in these relationships for so long? And if I actually ask the question, then I can actually start to kind of peel the onion back layer by layer and say, oh, I have a belief that I'm not worthy of being treated any way different than I currently am. Oh, that's my belief. It comes from what my life experience was. So there's plenty of room for self-compassion and understanding. And there's also now room for me to then question whether or not I want to keep believing that thought and what it's producing for me. What are the outcomes that are coming as a result of me believing that I'm unworthy of being treated with respect? Right? Now, once I recognize that, then I have to actually start and decide that I don't want to believe that anymore. I have to start moving towards something new, some new belief. So I've got to actually practice that self-compassion, that awareness, recognize that I'm operating from this place of the belief that it hasn't been helpful for me now in my adulthood. And then I have to act opposite or do something different than the belief that I've been living all along.
That sounds wonderful. But then if you're in a relationship where you got into it in that unhealthy place, you start to do your own work. You start to get conscious. You start to step into your power, healthy boundaries. But your partner's like, oh, no, you don't. Like, we're unhealthy here. And I'm going to remind you who you actually are. And a lot of times that's what I see. It's like one partner or the other's like, nope, we need to stay unhealthy. I don't want you to be empowered. I don't want you to be you. I want you to be scared. I want you to be in your trauma. I want you to be in your unhealthy attachment. So what do you do?
Well, and I would say that partner isn't necessarily saying that out loud. What's really happening for most of those partners is they're afraid that if the status quo changes, that their own stuff won't make them lovable enough and they'll lose the person that they really love.
Right. You getting healthy creates vulnerability on their end. Yeah. And a lot of times they'll sabotage in different ways to try to stay unhealthy together.
It actually shakes up the system if one or the other partner starts to actually do the work we're talking about. And that system, it's there for a reason too, because it's a way that we actually get to hold on to each other, even though it's not healthy.
Exactly.
So neither of us has to experience the possibility of rejection, even though we both know it's not really helpful for us. And right. It's coming at a high cost to our self-respect and to the lives that we were designed to live. So that actually does happen. The system tries to bring it back to the normal status quo because of fear and shame most of the time. Yeah. And that fear of rejection. but if you understand that, you can also then start to see it in a different light. So this one here, like he's asking this question, we don't know where he's coming from or what his background is either. But what he does have control over is he has control over figuring out what his part of the dance is inside the relationship, and where he may or may not be taking things personally, and where he may or may not have certain core beliefs of his own that are getting hit that keep him stuck in this wrangling kind of a game. And if he will then start to go do the work on himself to understand what are the core beliefs that keep me stuck in this pattern, what are the things that I do actually have control over, he'll start systematically, as he takes care of himself, he'll start systematically moving his boundaries to places where the level of what he believes about himself will match up.
Which will probably blow her up.
It will be a blow to the system of what's happening. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily that can actually be a loving thing to do, though, if your heart is towards growth and peace, right? It's not like he's got to show up and be mean to his wife. It's not like he's got to like sit and crumple and be like, she's so mean to me, and become his own victim. Like, that's not going to help him either. It's really through his own self-care, his own self-awareness, and then through the use of healthy boundaries based off of his true principles that will be an invitation for the relationship to either grow and change, or it will eventually become the tension of like a rubber band expanding that will eventually snap. And either way, it will be better in the long run.
Yep.
Because the what you're living in right now is not good for either of your souls.
Yeah. I mean, you're picking up on that. And I'm going to use a word that we've been trained not to say or bring up, but he's enabling her. And how do I know that? He's listing off certain things that are like really unhealthy, and he's kind of taking it, just allowing it again and again. And so if he were strong and he were honest, even in a loving, kind way, like he wouldn't be in the relationship that he's in. She would either have to shift or that relationship would end. Right? Yeah.
That's right. Like, and that's like and what I'm guessing is probably happening here is he's maybe got a value of not getting divorced or staying in a marriage, so he keeps getting cheated on. But he either has to then wrap his head around what that means to be cheated on and not take it personally if he's going to stay, or he's going to have to let his other values start to become a part of this equation too, and start taking some steps towards something different.
Yep.
He did ask another question in here, Brannon, that I think is worth at least touching on for a second too. And it says, she's having multiple affairs on me, yet she's constantly suspicious of me having an affair on her. Can you explain this behavior?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. If she's willing to cheat, and she probably assumes that you are too, because that's how people are. And if she has a lot of trauma, abandonment wounds, then she's going to show up in fear in the relationship to try to keep you in the relationship versus trust and love. And so, yeah, it makes a lot of sense why she's showing up that way. And this is a really hard one to not take personal. If she's going to him and saying, you're going to cheat, you're doing this, you're doing that. But the reality is that's not about him. That's about her.
That's right. And the accusations oftentimes, and this is something that is very, very common in the work that we do, Brannon. How many times have you had a partner who's been the one having the affair that is constantly going to their partner and saying, I think you're cheating on me, you're doing this and you're doing that?
Oh my gosh.
It's all the time. It's all the time. And the reason why, I'm thinking about like when I worked for the drug courts, we did this very first intro course called Thinking for Good. And it was, we would actually start with the people who were incarcerated with this. And one of the lessons was titled Birds of a Feather Flock Together. And it talked about this idea that when we are living a certain kind of a life, most of us aren't aware enough of ourselves to consider that somebody else might see the world differently than us. And so we just assume everybody sees it the same as we do. So if I am walking around feeling like knowing that I can't be trusted myself, then I assume that nobody else can be trusted naturally as well. And
Right.
so a lot of times, and this is kind of something to be aware of. If you're in a relationship and you know that you're keeping your fidelity, you know that you've got good bottom lines, you know where you're at, and your partner is constantly saying, "You're cheating on me, you're cheating on me, you're doing this, you're doing that." A lot of times, that's actually a tell that there's something wrong on the other side of things. Sometimes through behaviors, or sometimes through false beliefs that are going on there.
Right.
But that's also a way to then not take it personal, the way we were talking about. That's,
It's
hard.
possible. It's possible, but it's hard. And this is why I actually officiated my first wedding on Saturday.
Way to
I'm
go, man.
I'm a minister. Yes.
All right.
I was supposed to give some advice, and I did. And but the interesting thing is, I think we get marriage all wrong. We get together, and it's just like, I'm in love, and that's why I'm getting married. In reality, marriage is a refinement process, and it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to look within at yourself and get better, so that you can create more love. It's not about just like, oh, you're pretty and I love you and this is wonderful. Twitterpation. When that Twitterpation wears off, in comes the work, and that work is self work. And if so, she has work to do on her trauma, and she'll continue to show up this way again and again and again, unless she actually starts to do her own work and doesn't make it about you. You have work to do on your trauma, and you'll continue to be a doormat unless you do your own work. Because what Tyler's talking about, not taking things personally, the way that you don't take things personally is by dealing with your own stuff, is by becoming more aware of who you are, and by regulating your own emotions, by being more stoic and in your power. Like that's how you not take things personally. That's about you. And you'll invite her to either shift, or the relationship will end.
Yeah, and I just added this, and then maybe we can move on to this other question, Brannon. But I heard this quote before, and I actually really like it. I think it actually helps keep things in context for marriage. Number one, I heard one of my clients tell me that the Hebrew translation of helpmeet is one who pushes against. So to this question, you got a great helpmeet.
Yeah, a great teacher.
Yeah, and you needed to be that for her too. Yeah. You guys can both push against each other, and you'll both actually, it's like when you watch Ninja Warrior, The Warped Wall, it's the pressure on the outsides of the wall that allow you to climb higher. That's that pressure against both sides. So, but then the other quote that I heard, and this is the one that I'm thinking of, is that in a marriage, if you could see this in this way, you'd find a lot more joy and a lot less suffering. That everything your partner does can only be seen through two lenses. Everything they do is either an act of love or a cry for help.
Yeah.
And if you see it that way, all of a sudden your responses become much different than if you feel like everything is about you and you're taking everything personally.
Yep.
So what your wife is doing right now is a whole bunch of cry for help that's also maybe an act of love, because it's going to get you eventually to step into your own power and your own strength.
Yep.
And maybe that's just a different way to view it.
You've ever heard that Billy Joel song, Innocent Man?
Oh yeah. We used to listen to Billy all the time.
That song's interesting because it's like, look, I'm not the one that did these things. Like I'm an innocent man. Like I am an innocent man. The key for him is to know within his heart he's an innocent man. But not, he doesn't have to sing that song to her. He doesn't
No,
have to yell it in her face.
he just needs to have a clear conscience.
Yeah, I have a clear conscience. I know who I am. This is about her. This is her cry for help. And she's reaching out for love. This is not, I'm not going to take this personally. So now, what I'm going to do is see where I can hold space and empathy and love and help her process this, and where I need to be boundaried. If she comes at me in certain ways, I have to have my self-respect in place. I have to protect my values. I'll protect those values and I'll show up in love. And if you can do that, then it really creates safety for her to process her own stuff. So,
yeah, hopefully that's helpful to the guy who submitted the question here for us. So thank you for submitting the question.
Yep.
Let's do one more, shall we, Brannon?
Let's do it.
It's along the same themes. They both came in back to back, a couple days from each other. Says, hello, through listening to your podcast, I realize that there are traumas in my life that I have not dealt with. I hear of childhood traumas, and I have a few. I haven't heard much about my marriage trauma. I in no way justify my actions of pornography use and the addiction that followed. I made the choices on my own, but I know I must deal with these traumas to move forward in life and relationships. I feel my worst traumas were from my wife, and I've been trying to deal with it for 37 years. We're now separated and filing for divorce. Am I right to feel this?
I'd love to know more information with this. I'm gonna assume, which I don't love making assumptions, but I'm gonna assume that there actually is trauma here, and that he's not just playing the victim, or trying to blame her, but that there actually was some things that happened that were not okay, and pretty traumatic. So if that's the case, then absolutely there is trauma in a 37-year marriage. There's probably some form of trauma in every marriage, some more so, some less so. And I think that, yes, it's something that needs to be healed.
Yeah. So I guess the first question is like, it's almost like the question finishes with, am I right to feel this? Like, just validate that I feel what I'm feeling is okay. Again, we don't have all the details, but yes, like it's actually very common that both partners in a marriage will incur some kinds of traumas just by nature of being in relationships with another flawed human being.
Yep.
Right. But then there's also maybe the next step up in some marriages where one or both partners engage in things that, would be your classic physical, emotional, spiritual, social abuse, sexual abuse. That then would be actual, like, yes, real traumas that are actually having a massive impact on how you see yourself, how you see your life, your relationships. Trauma by nature is any experience that changes my outlook on life, basically.
Yep.
So yeah, like I think everybody probably experiences some level of trauma, even inside the context of their marriage. It's a matter of what you choose to do with it and how to deal with it that becomes the bigger issue.
Yep.
This kind of brings up something else, Brannon, that goes along with this. I don't know if this is in this question or not, but I know that that this is a hard one to talk about because, again, I hope that people can listen to this with some nuance and some middle ground. That if I'm the one who's done the betraying in my relationship, let's say, I've had this long term, and I'm assuming he has because he's talking about his pornography use and his addiction that followed. If he kept secrets and if he had his, addiction, whatever it was, pornography addiction or other forms of acting out for so many years, and then it all kind of came to a head and there was D-Day, obviously, we always focus a lot on the trauma that inevitably caused his partner.
Right.
Right. A lot of times, what kind of goes unspoken sometimes is a lot of times the betrayer, even though it's their fault for keeping the secrets and hiding and developing the addiction, they also have some level of trauma that happens as a result of all the stuff that goes on with D-Day and the things following it. Mm-hmm. Like the response from the partner, the incurring of all the shame and having that come to the surface. Sometimes the response from the partner naturally isn't it's obvious most of the time not like really packaged up beautifully because they're in a state of trauma themselves.
Yep.
And so then I often hear people, and it's almost like they feel like they don't even have a leg to stand on to say these things because then it discounts their partner's experience too. But they're like, man, I've realized that I'm really still just way afraid of my partner. Or, wow, I don't feel like I'll ever have a leg to stand on to have my own opinion. Or, they even experience like the kind of physiology that happens with the trauma response, like when they're coming home from work and they're going to have to walk through the front door and go, what state are things going to be in? And can I handle it when I walk in?
Yeah.
Like all of that stuff. And so if that's that trauma too, we don't do any favors by discounting that or saying it's not there. We actually need to bring that up too eventually and say, you got to address this. Like,
Yep.
that is valid and it needs to be worked on and addressed. It doesn't mean you still can't take ownership for your choices and your behaviors, which you should, because that will help you heal too. But yeah, you got to address those traumas that have gone on inside or outside of your marriage.
Yeah. I think you talking through that, Tyler, this whole notion of, if you did something horrible, like had an affair or betrayal or pornography use in the relationship, or that becomes the thing that is pointed to as the problem in the relationship. And it doesn't justify either partner to be horrible to the other person for any reason. And so, I mean, I've done disclosures, things like that, where people have been called POSs and just scum of the earth and whatever. And of course, there's emotion there behind it. There's reason why the partner is feeling that way.
Yes.
I've seen the betrayers, sleep in their car for weeks on end. And we're making it sound like woe is them. But the point being, that's not what I'm trying to do.
No.
The point being is it's traumatic. Like trauma is trauma. And it is traumatic to even disclose and go through all the changes and everything that is being uprooted in your life as a result. And so both people need to heal from their trauma and do their trauma work. And as both people do that, then the relationship becomes more of a place that really supports each other in getting healthier versus a place that continues to traumatize each other and get better.
Yeah. And I would just go along a little bit further with that, Brannon, that in my experience, and this is the hardest, like this might be one of the hardest things for anybody to do, is to have been the one who was blindsided and betrayed. And then in the aftermath of doing all of that work, some of their responses sometimes maybe weren't the best. And they were calling names, or maybe it got physical, or maybe there was some kind of like twisted retribution that happened as a way of trying to even the ledger, which is somewhat common. And then as they start to actually climb out of the pit of their own betrayal, part of what gets partners that I work with stuck who've been betrayed is because of the nature of what happened to them, and it seems so small to what they did to their partner back that they feel like it's not even fair or right. But that part of what they did back actually keeps their own heart stuck.
Yeah.
It keeps their own soul sort of like, in a certain sense, damned from progress, because the heart stays at war, not just with the partner who's done the betraying, but with themselves for holding on to it.
Yeah.
And I see partners who have been betrayed who eventually get to their spot in their own work where they realize, you know what, like my husband cheated on me with multiple women and he hid from me for 20 years. And then I told him he was a POS. But eventually, for their own healing, they do the same assignments of resentments and regrets that we have the betrayers do. And they look at their resentments and work through that with their betrayer. But eventually they get to regrets and go, that wasn't in line with my values. And I need to go, and for my own sake, not for their sake, but for my own sake, I need to get myself right with that so I can move on.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tyler. Like it is about your own healing. I think sometimes we get caught up in a little bit of like, well, what's the bigger sin? And it's like, well, okay, I cheated on you. That's like one of the biggest. That's about as big as it gets, right? But now let's say the partner is stonewalling and cold as can be for years.
10 years.
Yeah, like so. But that's not a sin, right? That's just like, yeah,
It's not as bad as cheating.
you're just protecting yourself. And you know, if you look at trauma through the lens that we look at it normally, which is big T trauma and little T trauma, there's both of that in a marriage as well. Betrayal, physical abuse, those type of things, big T trauma. But the little gaslights, the stonewalling, the manipulations, like those are all little T traumas that happen. And where you want to get back to with your partner is a place where you find connection and resolution. You find solace, you find peace and partnership. And so you got to be aware of those little T traumas because oftentimes they're just unconscious. They're just like happening and they're patterns in a relationship. And the consequences can be huge from those little T traumas.
Massive, and on both sides. Like, and you know, you said, I want to go back to what you said there for a second, because it's like you asked the question that's the biblical question: in whom lies the greater sin? Right. And I think what the main lesson is of that story is neither of us is actually really equipped to be judge and jury. And when we look at what the word sin actually means, sin means separation from or without connection. So instead of the judgment of sin, meaning you're a bad person, if we just looked at the definition of sin, it doesn't really matter how big it is. It's that there is that separation from or disconnection from. And so it doesn't matter in whom lies the greater sin. The pathway to freedom is both parties looking at what they can honestly take accountability for, and in that accountability, finding the freedom to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not, I don't think it's our job, Tyler, to be the judge and jury of our partner's sins. And I think that's a hard thing to say when you're the one being hurt by things like betrayal.
That is, though, the pathway to staying stuck.
Yeah, when we're the judge and jury, when we're saying you do something worse, so therefore it justifies all of my behavior, or you're a doormat now because you have to be. You don't have a leg to stand on. That's in God's hands. God looketh on the heart, and He knows. And the repentance process is absolutely individual. It's I don't need my partner to tell me what a piece of shit I am in order to repent.
Right.
Right.
That's on me to figure that out regardless.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, that's on me not to then incur a bunch of resentments towards my partner for calling me those names.
It's an ever-going concept and principle.
That's on me now to make peace with those in whatever way
sides.
I can, and to get to that point of, it's like this. Like, have you ever had this example? I'm sure you have, because you're my brother, where like one or the other of us gets in a fight with each other or does something stupid to each other. I think I'll give an example. I don't know if you did this, but let's just say you did this. That one time I couldn't find my shoes, so I borrowed your shoes for a day.
Oh my gosh.
And that turned into like basically me.
Tyler will destroy a pair of shoes in one day. Just they stink, like stinky and like
just wore them out. I just wear them out
one
fast.
day.
I
like
wear them out really
nice
fast.
Shoes.
Yeah.
Never seen someone so hard on shoes.
Yeah. So let's say I do that, and I did just totally jack your shoes.
Yeah.
And then I come back to you and I'm like, have you ever seen this happen? It's like, hey dude, I realize I'm such a tool. Like, I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. And then you might go, apology not accepted.
Yeah.
Like, what happens in that very moment of apology not accepted?
My heart turns into a rock.
Yeah. In whom lies the greater sin?
Yeah. Well,
by definition of sin.
As long as you're sincere in that and accountable in that apology, yes, then that's on me. But you can't just go around doing whatever you want. Be like, well, I'm sorry. I said sorry.
Said I'm sorry. I probably still owe you a pair of shoes.
Yeah, you
No,
do.
but that's the point, that let's say even if I am truly unrepentant, at the minute I incur the apology not accepted, I'm now signing myself up for the work of figuring out how to let that go.
Yeah. Now, yeah, you are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way, that's just the nature
It
of the
just goes
beast. It's
on
the
and
way it
on.
works, and it's not fair and it's not right, and it doesn't line up with this idea of a just world. But it is the pathway to freedom.
My two middle kids, like they got in what, and I shouldn't say this because everything's valid, but they got in what I thought was the stupidest fight. Um, it was about where one of them could put their legs on the couch while we watched a movie, and the other one, and then it escalated, just
Power
like
play.
throwing pillows at each other, yelling, "You never this, you always that, you're there," boom, and to the point where the rest of us got up, turned the movie off, and went to bed. Like, and so in the morning, we do this thing, and I would recommend it. And Mom taught me this, and it's beautiful. We call it the harmony chairs. And so I put them in the harmony chairs, and you can't get out. Like, you have to sit there, and it's face to face, and you have to sit there until your heart is at peace, until you have harmony. And it was fascinating to listen to them because they did not want to get out of the harmony chairs. And it was blame, but well, you did this and you did that, and you're the, and then they'd like stonewall each other, like, fine, I'll be here all day.
Okay.
I'll stay here. Fine. Whatever. All day long, I'll be here. And you know what the key is to get out of the harmony chairs, Tyler? And actually into harmony?
I got my own ideas, but what, Brannon?
It's when they stop and they stop pointing the finger that direction and they turn it back this way and they say, you know what? Like, having your feet there probably wasn't that big a deal. And I probably overreacted. And I'm sorry that I overreacted. When they take accountability for their actual part and stop trying to get validation for their pain and how horrible the other person is, then it opens up this space where they can work together and say, yeah, like, okay, I understand you, and you make sense, and they both feel validated. But that's the first key that has to happen, is they have to work on themselves. They have to see it within them in order to then connect to the other person. And my kids did it. I was proud of them. It took them way too long. And I let them grovel. I just let them go.
They have to work it out.
They worked it out and they got there.
I love it, man. You're right. Mom was brilliant coming up with the harmony chairs concept. We spent a lot of time face to face on those couches in the front room.
Yeah. Sometimes it was like, yeah, I'm sorry that I'm a jerk. Bye. I'm out.
I'm sorry. I want to get off this couch. I'm sorry too, but we don't really mean it.
Yeah.
But we said it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The principle is self-reflection, accountability, humility. Those things are the things that lead toward love and intimacy, and you're not taking personal the other person's pain. I really like what you said earlier. It's either an act of love or a cry for help. And if you're sitting there blaming, and unwilling to at all see the other person's side or own your own stuff, then you're a partner it's gonna be really difficult to get any resolution or meet bids for connection in that relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's where it gets hard, because then you have to add in, that doesn't mean that you're still not on the hook for your own good boundaries work. It's okay to see somebody else and still have your own boundaries.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Tyler, good discussion.
Good questions. Good discussion today, Brannon. Just to those of you guys listening, therapybros.com. You can go and either submit a question. We don't get to these quite as often because we like to prioritize callers, but you can either sign up to come on the show or you can submit a question. We'll get to it when we can. So thank you to those who submitted these questions today. Thank you to being here and listening. And until next time, you guys keep on keeping on.